All right, so this is Building Query, May 22, 2020. B5, you just ran off our agenda offline, but for the viewers, do you want to just hit the 3 big punch points so people watching this can know what they're about to see?
Totally, yeah. So this marks the end of Sprint J, which for Sprint J, we're mainly focused on just cleanup and groundwork for future stuff inside of Query. We've had a bunch of users sign up and give us a bunch of really important feedback around stuff like export and the way that certain data sets work and the way that we push and pull data sets has kind of all been sort of researched and laid out over the last little while. So today we're going to talk about stuff we accomplished this sprint that most of it is pretty low level, but it's still worth demoing. We're going to talk a little bit about JSON Schema. As far as we know, we're one of the first Go implementations to support the latest draft of JSON Schema. We're going to talk a little bit about QFS, which is our sort of underlying persistence layer thing. And then briefly about the sort of like query as an NPM-like thing that can automatically resolve data sets that you can reference. And those are the sort of 3 high-level things we're going to talk about. Does that sound good, Rico?
Oh, perfect.
I've set up an agenda that I'm just going to apparently blast through, but instead of just listening to me talk the whole time, Casey, you've been the one doing the most work on QFS. Do you mind telling us? You could share screen if you want, but just basically bring us up to speed on what QFS is and where we're taking it.
Sure. So QFS is an abstraction layer. It abstracts different file system behaviors so that we can access different file systems or store and get stuff from different file systems without having to write like custom code in Query for each thing. So right now we support, for example, because of QFS, we're able to store things on IPFS, but also on your local file system. And then this is how we will eventually expand into being able to support storing on S3 or using different, I don't know, whatever comes up that our users are like, we wish we could store on this thing. This is the way that we'll be able to do that. So for this refactor, one of the main things we did since QFS is previous to QFS, we were relying on some query code that we were cleaning up and moving a bunch of that into QFS and allowing, basically changing the way that we get and implement having a new file system or adding a file system to your query instance. So that's the bulk of what we did. I think that's what it is.
I think that very much covers it.
That covers it.
I very much like to link to, in the description in the YouTube comments, I like to link to any RFCs or issues that we just talked about. Is there an RFC for this that I should?
Absolutely, I'm glad you asked.
There's definitely a QFS RFC.
Oh, I've looked at this before, yeah.
But
there's also we
can pull 2 things up in here. We can see the RFC for QFS, but actually, I think it would be more interesting to talk about the changes to the configurability of QFS that we're landing in the future.
So that was part of this refactor is a tie-in to a refactor on our config. We are going to change the way that you can configure the different file systems that you would like Query to use. And now the idea is you will pass in a config object or a map string interface config object, and QFS will be able to just read that and spit back out a file system that satisfies that configuration.
Cool, lovely. So sorry. Yeah, sorry, I'll be right there, Laura. The lovely joys of managing both your home life and your work life at the same time.
I'm not going to use iMovie to edit that out because it will take an hour and a half extra.
Phenomenal. Yeah, Casey, just as Casey was saying, this is the actual config revision itself. You're gonna be able to sort of dial in and fine tune the places that query looks for and stores data in the long run. The first thing we're going to fix is where it looks for data. We also have an actual, this is the code for it, which is query.io/QFS. That's the sort of like place where all this is happening. And this is the giant PR that Casey landed with lots and lots of lines changed. Cool. Is that, Casey, anything else you want to add to sort of finish that out?
Just that it's, you know, sort of interesting work, and it's cool to see that it's cool to see how it will be even more useful in the future, and that we're still like learning exactly how we should be using it.
Absolutely, and I think it's sort of like ties in nicely to the thing that we'll demo after the JSON schema stuff, which we should just mention briefly next. But let's put a pin in why QFS is interesting. And the next bit I think we should just talk about briefly is as we mentioned at the top of the call, we now have an implementation of JSON schema that is written in Go and supports the latest spec of JSON schema, which turned out to be a lot of work and may actually. So JSON schema is a standalone implementation. You don't need to be using query for this. It's mainly relevant if you write Go code. But we actually have a massive, massive overhaul of this package that has made it, is a pretty big set of changes here that has made us compliant with the latest spec and has brought the performance of the JSON schema package up in many places. It's a little bit slower for really small amounts of data, but we're convinced it was a good change because those amounts of time where it's slower are kind of imperceptible to people. But the places where it's faster are for larger amounts of data, and that's a very exciting set of shifts. Yeah, and so we're very much looking forward to that. We've cut a release of this, and so if you need to reference the older version for any reason, you can actually just reference query at version 0.1.2, and then you have the old API. This version 0.2.0 references a different API, or is completely breaking a set of changes. Yeah, so it's worth it if you're a JSON schema person. It's worth having, it's worth knowing about. Yeah, it's very exciting. And I think the last but not least, we have one more thing to cover, which is sort of a quick demonstration of like some of the RFC work that we've been talking about otherwise. I'm just gonna quickly share screen one last time. So we spent a lot of time basically gathering user feedback from this first version of query that we put out and really understanding how we can adjust query to better fit the sort of like destination that we'd like to head towards. And so as we understand it, where was I was gonna look at the closed issues around ratifying RFCs. We actually ended up ratifying 8 sort of like RFCs, which are sort of road mapping documents around query over the last 4 weeks. And this sets the stage to kind of really tamp down what we've learned at query over the last, 3 years, and really set the stage for the next set of stuff, next set of features that we'll be shipping. So before we move into those new features, we really want to like clarify some of the UX, the way around query works, set up isolate a number of difficult problems around managing large amounts of data under version control, and really sort of like make it a little easier and redesign some of the concepts and terms that we use to interact with query to make it a little more understandable, hopefully. And so you can have a read through any of these if you really want to understand where query is going. This is really the sort of leg of work that we've been working on for the last little while. And ideally, when we're done this, when all of these sort of RFCs are landed, we're going to call that query a query version 0.10, 0.10.0, which will be the backend release that will sort of like cover a lot of these changes. We'll be doing a number of patch releases until then to sort of work our way up to it instead of doing everything all at once. But one of the big things that we sort of like, one of the sort of banner of things that we want to be able to show is this capacity to, let's make sure I'm in the right one. Cool, let's do this. Is the capacity to sort of like, we've had problems like this in the past, or not problems, but we think that query could be better in issues like this, where I think I need to first remove this. Give me 1 second to set up query, delete all, cool. And so what I've just done is removed this data set completely from my local repository. So if I type query list, we have a situation where I have a repo that only has one data set in it, or one query node that only has one data set in it. And what we really want to do is we want to live in a world where I can make a reference. I can run a command like query SQL, and I can make a reference to a data set that I don't have. But if you were using a system like NPM or any kind of classic package manager, I can do npm install this package. And npm does the work of figuring out where to find that for me and finding the latest version for me by default. If I want to install that package as a specific version, I can do that as well. And so for us, we really want to, the next thing that'll be landing sort of in the near future, or the next release of Qri, is the capacity to run a query or run commands that talk about data sets that I don't have and have Qri just grab them for me. So before I actually do this, I'm going to specifically show how I can turn off this behavior before I turn it on. Or in this case, I can use a flag called offline, which will basically say, hey, query, you're going to operate, but don't ever go to the network. Please don't sort of like talk to the network. And so by running this, I'm going to get an error message that is quite gross right now, but will be cleaned up by the time we actually ship this release. The important part here is this reference not found part of this error, which basically says, hey, I can't actually get a hold of that reference. You're referring to a data set that I'm not aware of. And so with the offline mode, it's kind of nice because like if I do query list, I could actually still run SQL queries against this turnstile daily count data set because it's local. And I could actually do that right now. We can do query SQL, select blah from this as turnstile. And I didn't type that right. Well, that's kind of sad. Oh, well, pretend it worked. It was great. I can run this with the offline flag and it will not work. But the exciting bit is I can run it with it just normally. And in the next version of Qri, it will know that I'm talking about a data set that exists online somewhere. And right here, it's giving me some info saying, hey, I'm actually pulling this data set from a place. And I'm now pulling that data set locally. And now if I type query list, I actually see that data set in my local repository. And so we're hoping to get to a place where now what this means for a user is you can just copy and paste these SQL commands around, right? It means that if someone else doesn't actually need to know what data sets you're referring to, they don't need to type, like right now you have to type query add B5 World Bank population before you can actually query it. And now you can just say, here, run this, and it will go and automatically grab the latest. You can include special things to sort of tweak that to make sure that a user is pulling exactly the versions that you're talking about so they get the exact same results. And all of that will sort of be batteries included with the next version of Qri that we ship. But a lot of that is sort of the result of this RFC planning process, where we're actually sort of doing a lot of work we've gone through everything that currently exists within Qri and said, either we are going to figure out a way for all of this to work together, we're going to get rid of it. And so we've gotten rid of some of the features that in the past sort of like haven't worked super well. The big one was cron. We had a sort of like built-in automatic data set updater machine. And we've come to realize that that's actually not central to what Qri does as a tool. But instead, what we've done is really gone through with a fine-tuned comb and understand, okay, what does it mean to automatically pull data sets to resolve the name of a data set and to be able to do that in a number of different contexts. And so we're really excited to sort of launch some of this stuff over the next little while. Looking forward to getting a lot of these features out. But if you want to see the features that as they're going to be shipped, take a look at the RFCs themselves. They document how Qri is going to look in a few months. And if you have any comments or feedback, particularly on the future stuff as it's happening, we'd welcome your feedback even before it's written, because that'll help us save time and not write features that people aren't interested in. But yeah, beyond that, this sprint was a lot of groundwork. We got a lot of groundwork done, and we're really looking forward to sort of picking up speed with some additions and improvements to both Qri Cloud and the CLI in the next sprint. And so yeah, I think that's our update. Anything else? Rico, anything we need to cover?
No. Any projections on 099 getting cut?
It'll definitely be in the next sprint. The question is just when. My hope is that we do it next week, but we have a number of outstanding questions on that. The milestone is defined in query.io/query 099. So when all those issues are closed, we'll cut the release. But my hope is that that's early next week.
Cool.
Neat. All right. Well, I think that covers it for us this week, unless anyone has any other comments. But
I'm saying no.
Cool. And thank you so much, everybody. This is much appreciated. And yeah, we'll see you in a call, which will be a week from Monday.
June.
In June. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
All right. And cut.